I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine, who will come on board to introduce us to our speaker. You know, we have, over the years with SIEEJ, we have grown from 100 people in this room to almost, what was it, 5,000, 6,000 people in 2020 when we pivoted. And we are averaging now about 300 participants for the Summer Institute. I think we're going to stay. I think we're going to continue to do this. It started to, just to add to that history, it started as an idea, really just about convening unusual suspects. We thought, well, charter school teachers and public school teachers, do they ever get together? Do we have the Board of Education members coming in with teachers, nonprofit agencies and organizations coming on board? We thought we just wanted to bring people, mix it up a bit, and we thought it was all going to be local. But by golly, by the second year, it had grown to other states and other folks were coming. So we decided there was a need and we wanted to be a part of it and wanted to continue this work. The power of convening and building community is what it's all about, bringing people together. So with that, I'm going to move on to Jasmine, who will introduce our speaker because he embodies that. All right, Jasmine.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tyrone Howard. He is a professor of education in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. His research addresses ties to race, culture, access, and educational opportunity for minoritized student populations. Professor Howard is the author of best-selling books. He is a native of Compton, California, where he also served as a classroom teacher. Professor Howard is a member of the National Academy of Education and has been listed by Education Week as one of the 200 most influential educational scholars in the nation on education practice, policy, and research. Professor Howard is currently the president of the American Education Research Association, which is the nation's largest organization focused on educational research and policy. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tyrone Howard.
We got some double dutch going on right here. Thank you, Jasmine. Soon to be Dr. Jasmine, right? Soon to be Dr. Jasmine. Speaking to existence. Thank you so much. It's my honor and my privilege. I feel like I'm not gonna look to my right side only. I got left side folks here too. My honor and privilege to be here with you this afternoon, evening. Can't say enough about how I am very much just in awe of the leadership of Dean Cheryl Holcomb-McCoy. Can we show her? I told Dean Holcomb-McCoy that when she called several years back about being on the advisory board, it was a no-brainer for me because she has a reputation that precedes her. She's someone who walks the walk, talks the talk, and my mother always told me, just always do right by people because you never know who's watching. So she didn't know I was watching, and so when she asked, it was a no-brainer. So I want to thank Dean Holcomb-McCoy for her leadership and for this invitation. Bonnie Berry, who is amazing as a logistics coordinator. Thank you for all the coordination. Appreciate that. Dr. Antonio Ellis, my God. My God. He said, when you do this, certain people just can't say no to. Right? So the entire School of Education, AU community, thank you for planning for all this work. It's important. I can't say thank you enough for what you do to continue to engage our community around important topics in education. Shout out to my AERA squad right here, right? We roll deep, don't mess with us, fellas. Look, I got the squad of Felice and Tony and Lori and John and Sean and George. So thank you all for being here. I know you've had a long day like everyone else. But the fact that you're here means a lot. We just spent time together last week, and so you're probably sick and tired of seeing me, but you guys just put up with me for one more day. So I thank you all for being here. So. And thank you everyone else for coming on a beautiful day. A little smoke in the air, but other than that, a beautiful summer day here to hear the conversation we want to share today. So how do I start? I always tell folks I have to pinch myself when I read these bios because I'm just a little black boy from Compton who doesn't realize that this story should not have happened, but it happened because I had people who saw something in me at times I did not see in myself. You know, parents who came to California from the segregated South, teenage mother. The story is not supposed to end this way, but it takes on the life that it takes on. And so my work and my life has been committed to how do you create those opportunities for other young people who oftentimes don't have the odds in their favor. So that's why I do this work. And so I sometimes step on toes when I talk, and I just say some toes need to be stepped on. I sometimes ruffle feathers. I say some feathers need to be ruffled. All I can do is speak the truth as I know it and try to hopefully make schools better for those folks who come from circumstances that are oftentimes working against them. So today it's about this pioneer, Dr. Ed Gordon, and I can't say enough about what his work means in terms of what we're going to talk about today. As Dean Holcomb-McCoy mentioned, he is a major, got a degree from Howard University. I didn't know he majored in zoology, of all things, right? But he is a pioneer, he's a trailblazer in educational psychology, a justice-oriented scholar, catalyst for new paradigms, and he consistently tells us, and I'll talk about this more in my talk, that he's just getting started. Just getting started at 102 years old, right? So whenever you think you've done a lot, look at Dr. Gordon, you realize you haven't done as much as you think you have, because he is an inspiration to us all on so many levels. But I want to kind of give a little bit of background about how his work helped set the context for what I'm going to talk about today. Because he's widely known for his research on human characteristics and pedagogy, the education of low-status populations. His work is also centered on the career development of black men who overcome enormous odds. His work has also been critical in the advancement of concepts around affirmative development of academic abilities and supplementary education. He has a book that was written in 1966 called Compensatory Education for Disadvantaged Programs and for Disadvantaged Populations Programs and Practices, which is, to me, a really important piece because Dr. Gordon writes this book in 1966. And in it, what he's raising is the fact that schools are falling short in educating diverse populations. Notice how I said that he says schools are falling short. He doesn't say students are not pursuing, students are falling short or families are falling short. This is right around the time of the whole, the Coleman report that comes out and the Moynihan report that basically kind of pathologizes black, brown, poor communities. But Edmund was really trying to help us kind of think about this differently, even in the mid-60s. And he talked about socially disadvantaged students or individuals whose day-to-day lives are profoundly affected by poverty, social conditions, structural inequalities, political exclusion. Again, he's talking about structural disadvantages. And he says these are issues not created by choice, effort, or merit, but he goes on to talk about the fact that these are, again, the fact that they're tied to structural inequalities and cumulative disadvantages. Very important shift at the time because others were blaming families for poverty, blaming choices, blaming lack of effort. But what Dr. Gordon does is he begins to kind of help us relocate how we look at the source of these issues. And so he's been an intellectual giant helping us to really think and redefine how we think about this term that's oftentimes used, and I've used it as well, called the achievement gap. In short, he says that there are factors outside of schools that matter. I'll say that again. There are factors outside of schools that matter. He said context is important. This is my language, that his ecosystems are relevant, and to ignore those would make one irresponsible for education, research, policy, and practice. His work in educational psychology informed us to think about how we need to learn how to listen, how we need to learn how to watch, how we need to learn how to learn. He talks about when you learn how to appreciate the way that young people pay attention to their surroundings, you recognize that they're informed by significant adults in their lives. He also goes on to talk about, if you go back to the beginning, he's arguing that school is important, but it is not the end of education, nor is it the beginning of education. And that's important here to think about what we're going to talk about today as it pertains to mental health, because oftentimes we don't look at the comprehensive picture of how we see young people being informed by schools. So how do we channel Dr. Gordon's work into today's discourse around mental health, around well-being, around destigmatizing the issues surrounding trauma, the impact of social emotional challenges that have all been prevalent and only been exacerbated since COVID-19, which takes us to another intellectual giant, which is James Baldwin. And I want to kind of frame the beginning of my talk around James Baldwin's favorite, I got a lot of favorite James Baldwin's essays, but one of the essays I have all my beginning teacher education students read is called A Talk to Teachers. I think that essay is still relevant some 60 years plus, right? Because Baldwin essentially is lifting up the idea that teachers have a responsibility. And essentially what Baldwin says is that there is no middle ground, that you have to be prepared to go for broke when it comes to advocating for those students who are on the margins. And part of what I love about this essay, he has a powerful quote that I just always feel like I have to lift up. He talks about the fact that one of the paradoxes of education was that precisely at the point where you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society. And it is your responsibility to change yourself if you think of yourself as an educated person. I maintain that we have young people in schools today who are oftentimes at war with the schools that they are in. But we oftentimes label students as the problem, but not the circumstances that they're in as the problem. The very thing that Gord was telling us to think about, right? How do we begin to shift the spotlight, change the paradigm, recreate different analysis of how we understand this? So stay with me as I try to develop this argument. So for the younger generation here, I want you to understand a concept that was just really eye-opening to me. I learned back in graduate school. It's all around the canary in the coal mine. And for folks of a certain generation, you know exactly what this is all about. For those who aren't familiar with it, this was a practice that was used by coal miners in certain parts of the country when they wanted to assess the overall sort of toxicity that was in the air within the coal mine. So what they would literally do is have the canaries go down into the coal mine, and they'd wait for a while. If the canary came out, that was a sign that that was a safe coal mine to go into. But in many cases, they sent the canary down, and the canary may not have come out, or the canary came out injured. And that was a sign that that was not a safe ecosystem, that there was toxicity there. I think we have students today who are canaries in the coal mine. There are students who are trying to tell us that certain learning environments are toxic. There's certain learning environments that are not healthy for development. And when we talk about mental health concerns, I think we have to be careful to only locate the reason for mental health concerns of young people being outside of school. For many young people, the origins, please hear me out now, folks, the origin of mental health sort of challenges originate in schools and oftentimes are exacerbated in schools, okay? So now I'm a faculty member, I always got homework I assign. So I'm gonna assign you one book. Here's the first book I'm gonna assign. So you have to read Carla Shalaby's book around troublemakers. This is again, one of my must-reads for my teacher education students, because in this book, what Shalaby does is much like Dr. Gordon does. She lifts up the fact that the very students that we label as troublemakers are perhaps the very students that we should be listening to. Because she says in many ways, they are the canaries in the mine. They're the students who are trying to tell us that there's something that's not right in this ecosystem, something that's not affirming. And she said the children who are more sensitive than their peers to the toxic environment of the classroom that limits their freedom, clips their wings, and mutes their voices. Again, some of the most brilliant and most intelligent and most resourceful and insightful young people are the ones we label as troublemakers. And I maintain there's a level of intellect that we oftentimes miss, because there are oftentimes young people who are in our classrooms who say, you know what, something's not right in this environment, and I will choose not to learn in this environment. They actively and consciously make that choice. I will not learn in this environment. Some go so far as to say, not only will I not learn in this environment, but I will sabotage this entire classroom to ensure that what? Nobody learns in this classroom, right? That's a level of genius that I don't think we recognize. But what we do is we place the onus to say this student is a troublemaker. And Shalaby lifts up these beautiful stories of young people who are just saying that I don't fit in the box. You want me to talk a certain way, think a certain way, act a certain way, and that's not who I am. I maintain that if we're going to understand how to respond to the needs of young people today, we must begin to listen first and foremost to the students who are labeled as troublemakers, because they're the ones who are telling us that there's something not right in the ecosystem. There's something that's not right in the air that takes away the very essence of who we are as young people. You go to any school in this country, public, private, charter, non-charter, I'm always intrigued by who's in the office. Who are the kids who've been sent to the office and why they have been sent to the office and their explanation of why they've been sent to the office. And you will find some of the most phenomenal kind of insights that you can possibly hear. And I'm going to share a few examples with you later. But I want you to keep this whole idea of troublemakers, canaries in the mine, and who are our canaries in the mine in our schools? Because I think we tend to silence them And I think what we also do in schools, we tend to say, you know what, we can't have these young people around the other young people because they might start to what? Raise their consciousness. So let's remove them from the environment. Let's place them someplace else. So if you want to find some of the most phenomenal spaces to listen and learn in, go to the in-school suspension spaces and listen to what those students have to say about school. Highly intelligent, quite insightful, highly analytical, but yet we oftentimes will find ways to ostracize them. So again, we remove the kids who we label as troublemakers, and I think there's something deeper we have to understand. So let's try to figure this out. Now, my colleagues and I, Luke Wood and Frank Harris, have done work looking at suspensions, because I think the students that we oftentimes suspend are, quote unquote, the troublemakers. And there's a long history on the research that shows that we know Black kids are more likely than any other group of students to be suspended, expelled. We've done all kinds of analysis in California and show that it's just, Black students are 5, 6, 7 times more likely to be suspended. Even in predominantly white schools, Black students are still the most likely to be suspended. And when you start to ask why, again, the analysis is placed on their behavior, without beginning to question, maybe they're the canaries in the mine trying to tell us that there's something not right with this environment and I refuse to be subjected to this. So now, part of the labeling happens early on in the process for many young people. And I think you cannot look at suspensions without looking at it within a racialized context, because there's a very clear racial context that's important here. I come back to Dr. Gordon because he raised the idea of we can't look at achievement gaps independent of the context. So let's look at the troublemakers sort of within the context of how it starts. We've had data on school suspensions for a long time, and now we have data on the rate at which we suspend children as early as preschool. Let me say this again, folks, because these are two words that should not be in the same sentence. The suspension of, I'm calling babies, because how old are our preschoolers? What? 3, 4 years old. So you've been on the planet 36 months, 48 months. We've already put a label on you. We give you 60 months to finance a car, 72 months to finance a car to get it together, right? But now we got data that shows that we suspend our babies as early as 3 and 4 years old. And when you look at it through this racialized lens, which I'm always trying to do, it tells a really deeply troubling story. Again, this is U.S. Department Office of Civil Rights data. So suspension rates for preschoolers is uneven acceptable. The most recent data from 2020 showed that Black students, and again, the students is still making them adults, or it's making them older than that. 14% of preschool enrollment, but 45% of all babies who are suspended, and 55% of students who are expelled from preschools. If those numbers don't cause us to say something's wrong with the ecosystem, if those numbers don't cause us to say, stop, let's think, what can be happening here, I don't know what will. So we're beginning to put labels on babies at 3 and 4 years old. And the data tells us that for any child who's been suspended one time, just one suspension, have about a 25% less likelihood that they will graduate from high school. So some of our babies have been suspended before they even got to preschool. And we have to ask the question, what explains that? I talked to a lot of my early childhood education people. I said, what does a child do in preschool that warrants a suspension? And so here's what I hear. You can't fight, you can't bite, you can't kick. Okay, let's just stay with those 3 for a second. How many folks here have been around 3 and 4 year olds? Okay, tell me what's one of the things that many of them do? Say it again, bite, fight, and kick, right? Listen, folks, I believe that white 3 and 4 year olds bite, fight, and kick. Asian American 3 and 4 year olds bite, fight, and kick. Latinx kids who are 3, 4 years old bite, fight, and kick, and Black children who are 3 and 4 years old bite, fight, and kick. But what happens in this country is that when Black children do it, they're held to a much higher standard and given much harsher punishment than other students are. Then we wonder why students are saying something's wrong with the ecosystem, because if you label me as a problem at 3 and 4 years old, you talk to me like a problem, you treat me like a problem, at some point in time I must begin to internalize that what? I must be a problem, right? But again, the ecosystem matters. What are young children telling us about the ecosystem? So I would go to different school districts and talk about this, and districts would tell me, wow, that is terrible, the disproportionality is unacceptable, we're a district that would never do that to Black students. And I would take people at their word, right? But now we got data, so now I got receipts. So the receipts can say something different. So I would go to districts and say, okay, well, how are you doing? They said, well, we're good. And then you look at the data. Well, your data doesn't seem that you're that good. So I said, well, look, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. Let me look at the data in Washington, D.C. You want to have this conversation right now? Okay, let's do it. Okay, here we go. So you go right to the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and so they give you a breakdown. This is the most recent data that OCR puts up, 2019. There you see the breakdown of the district racially and ethnically, right? DC public schools, 60% Black, 2.2% Asian. I don't need to give you the rest of the breakdown, you see it there. And so now I'm going to show you a snapshot of the suspension rates. And so what we're looking for here, as you all know, is proportionality. We hope to see that if we've got a district that has 59.7% of its student population is Black, that the suspension rate is roughly in that same area. Given a sort of standard deviation, maybe 2 or 3 percentage points above or below, right? But when you look at the data on suspensions, it tells us a very different story. So how can you have Black students who are 60% of the population, but 90% of the students who are suspended? That's some significant disproportionality. At some point, we have to ask the question, not what is wrong with the students in these ecosystems, what's wrong with the policies, the practices, the ideologies that allow this to happen. And I oftentimes tell my administrative friends, it is teachers who do the referring, but it's principals who do the suspending, right? Now, let me give a brief story. So I'm kind of a data geek. I just spent all day on this website, just looking at what the numbers are. So I was in a district in Georgia about a year ago, and outside Atlanta, I sort of pulled up their data, and the superintendent was in the audience, and it was pretty bad, kind of similar to this. Black students, about 25% of the population of the school district. There are about 65% of the students were suspended. He got upset with me. He stood up, he said, "You're making this a race issue, and it's not a race issue." He went on to explain how, you're not going to come here and sort of, cause issues to be issues that are not there, and this is not a race issue. This is all about, this is what he said, student behavior. He said, we have an ed code, and the ed code said if students fight, think about the preschoolers again, right? He said if students fight, bring weapons, or bring drugs, they have to be suspended. And it just so happens that the data you're showing is not about race, it's about behavior. And it just so happens, he said, that the Black students bring more weapons, and drugs, and fighting. I was like, wow, that's kind of a bold statement to make. So when he said that, it made me start thinking, I said, why are you upset with me about your data? This is what you report. I'm just telling the truth about what you do. There seems to be an issue here. So now, I've learned it's not just enough to show the data. Now folks need to be held to the fire about what they suspend for. So the Department of Education now provides incident types for why schools suspend children in the first place, which we should have been doing for a very long time. Because what will happen is folks will say, if you fight, bring weapons, or bring drugs, you have to be suspended. Well, now let me give you the top 10 reasons why we suspend in this country. Anybody want to guess what the top reasons are? Come on now, you always good. Top 3. Somebody over here knows their stuff, right? So the top 3 are not drugs, fighting, and weapons, but it's disrespect, defiance, and insubordination. Now, why is it important to raise those? Because there's a level of subjectivity that are attached to each one of those areas. The idea being that what one teacher may define as disrespect is completely acceptable in another. The way that defiance will be looked at in one context is completely okay in the next. There are days I show up at work, I'm defiant, they don't send me home, right? But others, what young people do, and they get looked at as problematic. Insubordination. I know a lot of my colleagues, the Holcomb-McCoy, who are insubordinate all day long. They get promoted. They get awards. But I digress, right? But I raise these now, and part of what we're trying to do is get a deeper dive, because now districts are required, this is prior to COVID, to report their specific school type for what they're suspending for. Now let's be clear, dress code violations, drugs, and weapons are on the list, but they're not the top reasons why our children are being suspended. Now, if we wanted to go further, I'm intrigued by this one around dress code violations, because that one is also highly racialized and gender, because what we're finding is Black girls are more likely to be suspended for dress code violation than any other subgroup of students. I don't have to tell you the reasons why, okay? So I think it requires a deeper dive. And then here's the one I find really problematic, chronic absenteeism. In California, in the city of Sacramento, the capital of our state, if you miss 10 days, you were suspended for 3 days. Help me understand that. So you missed 10 days. On the 10th day that you were suspended, you were then sent home for 3 more days by suspension. Makes total sense to me. not, right? So the goal here is to begin to do a deeper dive to look at who are the canaries in the mine. When it comes to issues around mental health, I think we need to recognize that young people who enter schools, Black, brown, poor, students with disabilities, are oftentimes labeled in ways that we don't recognize, which only intensifies the kind of stresses that they have to deal with. Are you all with me on this right now? Okay. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. So now, let's talk about trauma, because this is worrying me that trauma has been one of these terms that's being used over and over again. I think that we're using it without the kind of depth and complexity that is required. And I think we're also locating trauma in not all the right places. So, according to the American Psychological Association, you see it's, any kind of difficult situation, horror, terror, helplessness that is due to, physical abuse. You can read it there. So we've been talking about trauma, which I think is an important thing to do, right? And I think we have to begin to recognize that in many ways, we have to ask the question, why has mental health been so stigmatized? I would argue that it has always been stigmatized, and why I argue that race has been our most detractable issue in the United States. Mental health has been our most frightening issue. We avoid talking about it, we avoid seeing it, we don't want to be associated with it, yet it is very close to all of us, right? Either we have our own mental health challenges or someone very close to us is dealing with them in this current moment. Consider data from the National Institute of Health that says 1 in 3 adults has dealt with some form of anxiety. There's over 33 million people in this country who deal with some form of anxiety. 1 in 4 school-age youth deal with some form of anxiety. That's 12 million young people walking to schools every day who are dealing with anxiety. Many of those cases undiagnosed. Depression, according to the National Institute of Health, is by far the most prevalent mental health issue in our country. It afflicts over 18 million adults in any given year. It's the leading cause of disability for ages 15 to 44, and is the primary reason why someone dies of suicide about every 12 minutes, or over 41,000 people a year. We oftentimes have this narrative around mental health. Let's not talk about it. Let's not address it. If someone mentions that they have mental health challenges, we oftentimes tell them, you gotta be strong, you gotta fight through it, you're just being weak. There's all kinds of taboos that we have allowed to be sort of in place around mental health. It is time to start destigmatizing mental health, to talk about it, to acknowledge it, to say that it's okay to ask for help. And I'll give some reasons in a moment of why we have to do this in respect. But again, part of what I want to situate here is that when we talk about trauma, it also is being tied, according to APA, around school violence. I raise school violence because when you look at the ways in which much of the literature has talked about trauma, it's oftentimes located within communities, or homes, or parents, or with the child. Very little of the data talks about school as a source of trauma, school as the catalyst for trauma, or school as a place that triggers trauma that kids may already have. Oftentimes, school is positioned as the place that is a safe haven for young people, and I would argue, based on data we have, school is oftentimes not that safe place for children. Because again, many of our young people who are labeled as troublemakers are frequently the canaries in the mine. So let's unpack this a little bit further. We know that more of our educators are being introduced to ACEs that talks about adverse child experiences, different kinds of ways in which young people encounter different obstacles in life. And if you look at the ACEs study that came out in the late 90s, again, it locates the various types of traumas where? In the home of young people, in the communities of young people, right? It almost pathologizes and say, look, schools, this is not your fault. These young people already came to you broken. They came to you flawed because they have all these issues here that they have going on. So therefore our job, and this is one of the things that has always disturbed me, our job is to save them. Our job is to rescue them. And if I have another teacher ed student who tells me that they're going into teacher because they want to save children, I am going to scream. Your job is not to save children. That's not the goal here. But again, we have ACEs that are used as primary frameworks that I think locate trauma in homes and communities, which pathologizes typically poor people and folk of color. Now, we know back in 2013, there were the Philadelphia ACEs that tried to expand the first sort of conceptualization of ACEs by saying, listen, there are other types of things, such as if they witness violence, still located where? In the home or in the neighborhood. If you felt discriminated against, but again, oftentimes not located within the context of schools. If your neighborhood was bad, if you were bullied, if you lived in foster care. So again, even in the community level adversity, while it is a little bit more critical, what it does not do is begin to look at what happens in the context of schools. Again, what I admire about the work that Edmund Gordon did is he said, let's shift the paradigm. When we talk about achievement gaps, we're not going to make this around the effort of young people. Let's look at the ecosystem that they are existing in, okay? Same thing when we think about mental health. So now, part of what we're trying to do is I got some doctoral students, we're trying to talk about school-induced traumas. What are the traumas that occur at school for being labeled as a problem, for being constantly sent to the office, for being told that you are being disruptive, for being told that you are disrespectful, for being told that you're being insubordinate, right? And I maintain that there are young people every single day in schools who are trying to tell us that they're encountering school-induced traumas. The question is, do we have the fortitude to listen to them, to begin to think about the kinds of ideologies, the kinds of practices that young people encounter on an ongoing basis? School-induced traumas. Let's talk about a few of them, okay? So there's the report that came out by the U.S. Surgeon General that talked about the ways in which we have a litany of data that shows that even prior to the pandemic, mental health issues were on the rise. The number of young people who felt sad or hopeless was increasing. Suicidal ideation was increasing. Psychiatric visits to emergency hospitals were increasing. Suicide rates for young people were increasing. All these data here have only increased significantly since the pandemic. So for us to not talk about mental health at a time when so many of our young people are in crisis makes us irresponsible. And I maintain that our silence about mental health issues makes us complicit in the perpetuation of the issues that continue to afflict lots of children. And we have to continue to say that the more we stay silent, the more complicit we are. So now, I raise this because, again, the COVID data is clear. If you go back, you can look at this report. It's really an insightful report. It unpacks all the different effects that we dealt with COVID. But I raise this in light of the fact that there's data that came out from the Center for Disease Control that looked at how we frame trauma. And again, what they're doing is still looking at community and home. We're also trying to include schools in that framework. Again, schools can be places that harm, but schools can also be places that heal. And that's the framing that we have to have as well. Now, I raise this in light of the data we're seeing now around youth suicide, because the data tells us that, look, there are kids who go to school and they are criminalized, they are targeted. The number of young people we are seeing who are being arrested by school resource officers, kids as young as 5 and 6 and 7 years old, being put in the back of police cars. I mean, the data is continuing to show that young people don't always feel safe at schools. They don't always feel seen at schools. They don't always feel protected at schools. Schools are supposed to be safe havens. Schools are supposed to be supportive spaces. When we look at the disproportionate number of schools, and here's the data we looked at, there was a piece that came out the other week that we wrote about 3 years ago, that the larger number of school resource officers that you had, the higher numbers of arrests and detainments you had at school. So I keep asking the question, why do we keep hiring school resource officers, yet we don't have mental health therapists? Why do we put more police in schools, yet we don't have social workers or behavioral specialists? We would rather deal with the outcome as opposed to the symptoms in the first place. Show me a school that has more social workers, more psychiatric social workers, more mental health workers. You find probably less of a need for having school police, as the kids call them, right? But again, so we look at the data from CDC that looked at, there have been 4 youth groups that have had the most significant increases of death by suicide since the pandemic. And this is why, again, the conversation about mental health has to happen. The group that's had the highest rates of death by suicide since the pandemic have been boys ages 10 to 24. Now, we need to have a boy conversation in this country, because when you talk about issues tied to mental health, what has happened for far too long in our society is that the persistence and prevalence of toxic masculinity continues to shape the way that many young boys are sort of socialized. Boys are not supposed to cry. Boys are not supposed to feel. Boys are not supposed to hurt. Boys are not supposed to feel sad. And if you do, there's something wrong with you. There's something flawed with you. There's a growing body of research that says we need to begin to sort of redefine our categories of what masculinity means in the first place. But the data tells us that both boys and girls have suicidal ideations at comparable rates, but girls are more likely to do what? Talk to someone, right? Whereas boys are more likely to keep things inside. I tell principals and school leaders all the time that you are probably looking at students who are walking on your campus who are ticking time bombs with so much turmoil and anger and angst that you can't even begin to imagine when that student will ultimately erupt. So we have to have this conversation about the messages that boys get sent at a very early age about how they think about emotions, how they are comfortable with addressing their emotions and the like. We also see our LGBTQ plus youth. The numbers for LGBTQ plus youth have been on the rise for some time. They exploded during the pandemic, unfortunately. Because again, the reality is that the levels of transphobia and homophobia are all too real. And again, our silence is complicit in this, folks. I will keep saying it as we think about mental health. If we don't talk about it, if we don't put supports in place, we are in some ways indirectly responsible for this. Then the next two groups I find to be really fascinating are Black and Latinx students. Because I think in many Black and brown communities, issues around mental health are like cultural taboo. We don't acknowledge them. I remember years ago, my mother would say, you know, only white people go to therapy, you know that, right? Like, where did you get that from? I think all Black folks need to go into therapy, right? But the bottom line is, there's this idea that I think because of the vestiges of racism, we can't give the wider society any reason to think that we are not whole. Because any indication that we are less than whole is yet another reason for folks to sort of take another reason to say we are less than, right? And when you begin to do an intersectional approach, what does this mean for Black and brown youth who might be queer or who might be boys or who are trans students? You begin to see why we have to have a much more complex way of how we understand that there are young people who are crying for help. Again, the canaries in the mine. How do we think different and shift our paradigms? I'm going to talk about some interventions in a moment. All right, and then we see this data that's coming out that shows that we're seeing a surprising uptick with Black girls in suicide rates. This is the nexus of sexism and racism and its impact on Black girls. That the data shows that the rates of death by suicide for Black girls has begun to surpass that of white girls in ways that are causing researchers to say we need to begin to understand that if we're going to have intervention, and this is key, we must have culturally responsive types of interventions. So just because we have interventions doesn't mean it's going to meet the needs of a diverse population. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a second as well. Now, I'll also say this. Coming back to school-induced racial trauma, it plays itself out in lots of ways. There's abuse, violence, and neglect, which we've seen cases happen in schools. There's also sort of school-induced trauma that can be in the form of racial profiling and learning. I talked about the suspensions and expulsions that we see. But one of the ways that I think we don't talk much about is young people, Black and brown youth in particular, who sit in classrooms where there's low expectations, there's no rigor, there's no care. I'm just not going to teach you. I'm not going to give you the time or the attention. And if we don't think that's a form of trauma, I think we're fooling ourselves, because the message is loud and clear. You're not worthy of my time. You're not worthy of my effort. You're not worthy of my attention. And there are young people who enter into spaces where they feel like, I know I can do what I want to do because that teacher doesn't concern themselves with who I am. Now, let me give you some examples, because even when students do begin to speak up and speak out, they quickly get labeled again as problems. So again, I'll show you, I love student work. I'm a big fan. I've spent time in school. So here's a I told you, I see students in the office. So I was in a school in Los Angeles, third grade classroom. There's a young man in the office by the name of Jameer. And so I just started the conversation with Jameer. I said, Jameer, why are you in the office? He said, well, I made a mistake. The teacher, sir, you know how it was, come sir. Sir, I made a mistake with the teacher. And I had to write a letter to apologize to the teacher for what I did. So here is Jameer's letter. Now, he was there because the teacher said he gave the middle finger to her class. Jameer said he wasn't giving the middle finger, he was trying to give the peace sign, but his index finger didn't come up at the same time. So that's what really happened. So I love his letter here though, right? This is what he wrote. I'm sorry for sticking the middle finger at your students, and it was not on purpose. I'm just giving you this note to remind you how great of a great student I am, comma. And we got on the right track at first, but I fell apart, and I hope we can be friends again. And this note goes to all the other teachers I disrespect, but this is mainly for you. Hope we can get along again. And that's Jameer. He's saying sorry to the teacher, right? And he kept telling me, he said, but sir, I was just trying to say peace to them. My other finger wouldn't come up, right? But he was sent to the office for apparently giving the middle finger. How come we can't see the kind of, I think, genius that exists in a student like Jameer who's trying to say, listen, give me a second chance. I think there's so much wisdom in what young people are trying to offer. But Jameer is not the only one. I'll take you to a fourth grade student. This is King. You all probably seen this before. King is a legend, right? King is a 9-year-old student who was given an assignment by his teacher. And the assignment was very clear. They read a story, you had to say what you liked about the story, what you didn't like about the story, and a question for the day, right? With liked, disliked, question. Okay, so here's King's essay. I know you can't see that, but I'm going to give you King's account of what his essay is. King said, today was not a good learning day, blah, blah, blah. I only wanted to hear you not talking. You said something wrong, and I can't listen when I hear lies. My mom said that the only Christopher we acknowledge is Wallace, aka Notorious B.I.G. Because Columbus didn't find our country, Indians did. I'd like to have Columbus Day off, but I want you to not teach me lies. That is all. My question for the day is, how can white people teach Black history? King Johnson, okay? Now my question to you is, did King meet the requirements? What he liked, what he didn't like, question of the day, right? So you see here what King's teacher wrote. King, I'm very disappointed in your journal today. To which King says, okay, right? That's a you problem, not a me problem, right? You problem, not a me problem. Again, genius. I've done what you've asked me to do. Don't ask me to tell you what I like and dislike unless you really want to hear it, right? But then this gets labeled as being, I'm disappointed in your journal today. So then when King disengages here, we wonder why, right? When King refuses to participate, we wonder why. Because when I do participate and when I do the things that you ask, I get labeled as being difficult, right? These are the kinds of ways in which if we listen to young people, we hear the ways in which their genius, their brilliance is oftentimes extinguished. Y'all with me on this? Yeah. Okay, so what do? So I want to say that we have to begin to think about, as we begin to have interventions around mental health, that we have to have race as a part of that work. And Adam Alvarez, who's a colleague of mine, who's at Rowan University, has been doing this work. He has a phenomenal piece that came out in AERA where he talks about, he does a critical review of the fact that so much of the trauma on race, so much of the research on trauma has been absent of race. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. And his contention is that if you don't locate race, you may further traumatize kids of color. Because some of the paradigms, some of the frameworks, some of the questions are not culturally responsive and don't have race consciousness. And he lists up the fact that by centering race, he says he maintains answerability, he's responsible for holding researchers and research accountable for reproducing racial inequity through westernized colonial logics of knowledge production and dissemination. We have to make sure whatever our interventions are, don't pathologize folks of color, don't minimize women, don't have queer folks look as if they're somehow abnormal. We have to be responsive in the frameworks that we use. And so I want to just lift up a few before I conclude and we can move to some Q&A. So what is needed? I'm talking about the fact that race-conscious, culture-responsive approaches to trauma and mental health, policies that mandate mental health experts in high-need schools, a shift in the narrative around mental health, particularly in historically oppressed communities, and more research and data on the impacts of mental health on academic experience and outcomes. Kids cannot be at their best academically if they're struggling with depression. Kids will not turn in homework assignments if they're dealing with bipolar disorder. And the list goes on and on. We put the cart before the horse. We want kids to walk in, whatever mental health challenges they have, let's act as if they don't exist. When they don't perform, we assume something's wrong with them. Again, coming back to Ed Gordon's point about we put the onus on young people, not on the systems and the ecosystem around them. So let me just give a few examples. I'm in Los Angeles. Los Angeles Community Coalition is a community-based organization whose focus has been around providing supportive spaces, healing spaces for young people, and helping them to identify resources, strategies to address stress, anxiety, and depression. You walk into these spaces, young people are in circles, they're talking, they're having discussions about how they feel. They have what are called emotion boards. When you come in, you put your emotions. How do I feel today? Am I depressed? Am I angry? So it's just opening up a conversation about how I feel. And it goes a long way to helping to normalize how young people can begin to express their emotions in a productive, healthy, and healing way. And what they also use is art. They also use writing. You see some of the work that these students have done in some of the space. They talk about issues around immigration, around colonialism, around identity. What we're finding with COCO, as we call them, is that they have used art and healing circles as a way to get students to talk about emotions. Some students are very much uncomfortable with it initially, but they're trying to see if you start at younger ages, kids become socialized into thinking that it's okay to talk about my emotions. Now, that's one effort that we see with the Community Coalition. One of the more powerful examples that we also see is an organization called Cadre. Cadre of South Los Angeles said we can't talk to the young people about mental health if we don't talk to their parents and their grandparents and their caregivers. So this program works specifically with adults because the adults have been socialized to not talk about mental health issues. And the reality is we know grown folks, we have sometimes intergenerational trauma that has never been addressed. So in Cadre, they have these spaces, they meet weekly, and some of the sessions here are beyond powerful. They have some sip and share kinds of sessions that get really, really, I think, illuminating because again, it creates the kind of atmosphere for folks to come and talk about their own traumas, how they are healing, what has helped, what supports they need, what they've got supports. They have a community garden because the community garden has been a therapeutic outlet. Again, culturally responsive supports that says that you can talk about mental health challenges in a way that doesn't stigmatize you, demonize you, or otherize you because it goes a long way. And then another example that I'm really fond of, and many folks here are probably familiar with, the Children's Defense Fund's Freedom Schools. If you've not seen Freedom Schools, it's one of the best kept secrets that's out there around how we lift up a focus on literacy, mental health, physical health, and civic action. You have to see, Bonnie, you know.
Yeah, I work for Marion.
Okay, so you know, right? So you have to see Freedom School because their conversations around mental health and well-being are part of the curriculum, where you talk about not just academic enrichment, students talk about social action and civic engagement. There's very much a servant leadership framework that the young adults who work in these schools are focused on service. There's a big nutrition, health, and mental health component. The books that they read, the discussions they have are about how are you feeling, how can we help to make you well, and there's a big parent and family involvement. So again, Freedom Schools are yet another way in which we can think about this work. And then I have an article that we just came out with that talks about the very point that Adam Alvarez lifted up around issues around trauma. We looked at it with Black youth because I think in so much of this, we have to begin to make sure these conversations happen within gender and racialized context because again, we can't use a one-size-fits-all approach to do that. Let me close with where I started, with the man that this lecture is named after. Dean Holcomb-McCoy said that the work never stops. And I think that is so fitting for Ed Gordon. Just 2 weeks ago, Felice and I got an email. Okay. I want to read you the email, okay? The Cliff Notes version, because whenever I think I'm accomplishing something, I'm reminded I haven't done anything, right? So Ed says, Felice, I think I told you in Tyrone, I would like you to know I've adopted an agenda for the first decade of my second century. I have 5 things that I want to accomplish. This man is 102 years old. Okay, here we go, real quick. He says, 1, I want to repurpose educational assessment to better serve human learning as well as measurement. Assessment can be used to enable learning as well as to measure. I have 4 books underway, 2 of which are under contract. Let me say that again, that last sentence. I have 4 books underway and 2 under contract. And he's 102. So we got to step our game up, y'all, right? So number 2, he says he's trying to get greater balance to acknowledge the debate concerning how people learn. Human variance is the Achilles heel of pedagogy. He has 2 volumes devoted to this topic, both in focus on commonalities and generalities. 25 years ago, he says, I edited Human Diversity and Pedagogy. My book also pays too much attention to alleged group differences, while individual variation may be with potential action. That's 2. So he had 5 things he's doing, right? 3, Felice has the same email, so if I'm lying, I'm dying right now. This is right. 3, he says the failure of Negro education may have distracted from the remarkable achievements in the intellectual, competitive spaces and the population in some ways similar populations. I'm trying to lead a group of historians of an inquiry into what new learning can be learned from the 450 years of Africans in the New World, most of them enslaved. That's his number 3. He goes on to say number 4, that his opening lecture around the AERA series on Brown lectures, he made the claim about the Brown decision concerning school segregation. He goes on to explain that he wants to try to reconceptualize the meaning of equity and educational opportunity to privilege appropriateness and sufficiency to the needs of learning persons. And 5, he says that my youngest son and I are trying to develop a model for a virtual supplementary education service to be accessible via the internet to students and their parents, whether the internet can be accessed or not. Yeah. He goes on to explain that he's ready to go to work. He said he's gathered some of the resources from the philanthropic community. I think it'd be great if we were able to act on behalf of a respected institution such as AERA. If this man does not inspire us, if he does not give us the foresight to say there's always more work to be done, I don't know who does. So it is an honor and a privilege for me to be able to give this lecture in his honor, because he lets us know that if we think we've made progress, we need to think again, that we need to roll our sleeves up. If he's got 4 books in the queue, let's get to writing, folks. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You can stay right there.
Yep.
And then we'll just open up, if you have questions, raise your hand, go for it. Speak loudly so the folks online. And Bonnie, you're monitoring questions online. Okay.
Dr. Howard.
Yes, sir.
James Jackson of Howard University.
James Jackson, how you doing, sir?
As you were talking, the idea of creating a culture of care came to mind. As a special educator, I've made an effort in my last 30 years to sort of help my students, I work with kids, of behavior and emotional. I'm trying to help my students develop this idea that they need to walk into a classroom with a culture of care. And that culture of care for me means that we don't overlook who these kids are.
That's right.
But also just deal with the fact that they show up the way they show up.
That's right.
We cannot allow for sexism. We cannot allow for racism. We cannot allow for all the things that plague us as a society. Because in my perspective, it is important for me to help my students create a sense of community.
That's right.
For them to prosper, not only in school, but outside of school.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question to you is, what are your thoughts as you talk about all the stuff that you talked about?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about helping schools and teachers create a culture of care to minimize some of the challenges that we have with mental health, emotional health, racism, sexism, all of that?
Yeah. Dr. Jackson, how much time we got for that question?
It's up to Dr. McCoy.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, but the question I pose is, whose version of care are we talking about? Because
Well, I'm thinking that, from my perspective, for me, it starts with the teacher.
Yes, yes.
And I think because I cannot control what goes on outside of my classroom.
Right, right.
And I think if I'm going to advocate for my students, then I need to be on the forefront of saying to my principal or my administrator that you need to help me in creating this culture of care so that I can get how to try to infuse it
I got
the
you.
whole school.
I got you. So I think you're spot on. I agree with you 100%. When I say whose version of care we're talking about, because I think care has a cultural context to it. That what care looks like in one setting is completely uncaring in the next. And I think we've got to do a better job as a teacher, education, counselor, preparation, leadership development community of helping folks to recognize the complexity of care. So for example, I grew up in a household where I knew if my mother was getting on my behind, that meant she cared about me. Now, if students go to school and the teacher doesn't hold them accountable because they've done things they shouldn't be doing, the teacher thinks, I'm showing I care because I'm not bothering. The student is interpreting that to me, you don't really care about me. So we have to have culturally synchronous notions of care, right? I think this is where teachers need to spend time within communities and within families, and to understand that the way that we define care in my household is not the way we define care elsewhere, right? I remember taking my kids out, and we'd be out and about. This probably happened to lots of folks before. And my kids would watch the way other kids talk to their parents. And my kids would look at me like, did you see what just happened? But that's a form of care within that particular family context. That doesn't fly in my household. Kids don't talk to adults in that way. But again, because we have such a demographic divide between who teaches and who learns, and you have well-intentioned teachers who think, I'm showing that I care, because guess what? I let you play all day today because I care about you, right? You talk back to me in all kind of crazy way, but I care about you. We can't talk about care as if it's a unilateral sort of construct. It has so many layers to it, and even within group, there's variation. So I think we have to do the work that Carol Lee's been doing for a long time to look at the complexities associated with care and how culture is multifaceted in that construct of care. So that if you say you want to do the care work, sometimes care means you do the very thing that Judith Kleinfeld talked about back in the 70s. I'm a warm demander. I'm going to expect a lot from you, but I'm going to also provide it within the context of, again, what I think care means in your own sort of orientation. That's why I think that we missed the boat, because you got lots of well-intentioned teachers say, you know what, I love these kids as much as I could. I cared all I could, but they wouldn't listen to me. Because sometimes it's not about being liked, it's about being respected. That's the way care manifests in some contexts. We can talk all day about this one.
I mean, there's a lot of components to it.
Absolutely.
And the way I approach it is, I use Rudolph Dreikus as a democratic teacher as a method of doing that. Because a democratic teacher is somebody who's going to not only be responsible for his or her students, but also demonstrate certain characteristics to help kids develop certain skills.
Yes.
That helps them not only in the school context, but in the larger society.
Amen. Yeah. But again, that is rooted in the idea that when I see a particular child, I see the best in that individual and will then invest the time, commitment, and resources to help them attain those skills. If I don't see that student as being worthy, then I'm not invested. And this is what happens all the time.
Then that brings me to another question.
Talk to me.
What is the role of emotional intelligence in administration and teaching?
It's high, it's incredibly high. But that emotional intelligence, once again, has to be situated in their cultural context that realizes that when you walk into a space, look, you've been doing this for a long time. Young people watch. Day one, they assess who you are as a teacher. First day, I always tell my beginning teachers, you know what? The first 10 minutes, you get sized up by 5-year-olds. Right? And the first 10 minutes, what happens, I spend too much time in school, it's like I can predict it like clockwork. And the first 5 minutes, the kids say, okay, we got the niceties out the way. Let's go and let's see what this is really going to be about. And one student decides to cross the line. And when that student crosses the line, every other student is watching. And that first 10 minutes is going to tell you what the rest of the 180 days look like. If that teacher just falls apart and emotionally is not there, it's a wrap for the rest of the year. Right? And I think what happens is that you have individuals, Black, white, Asian, Latinx, who don't have the emotional intelligence to walk into a classroom. Can we just be honest for a second? Where kids are gonna call you out your name, kids are gonna cuss you out, kids are gonna threaten you, kids will tell you about your mama on the first day, right? First day. Here's the reality. The data says that we lose about 30% of all new teachers leave within the first 5 years in urban schools. Listen to this, 8% leave during the first year. And if you don't tell me that's not tied to emotional intelligence, then you missed the boat, because these are teachers who say on Friday, I'll see you later at the end of the day. And they're not saying I'll see you on Monday. They're saying I'll see you later. I'm not coming back here. We see it in our teacher education program all the time. Folks who know their content well, but don't have the emotional intelligence to understand the kinds of ups and downs, highs and lows that come with being in the space for young people. And look, let me be clear about this, because some folks think that this is about you gotta just put Black kids with Black teachers. That's not always the answer, because you got Black folks who don't have the emotional intelligence to be around Black kids. So this is much more complex than that, but I think we have to look at the role that culture plays with emotional intelligence. And some folks, here's my last point on this, because I talk all day about this one. We have to be better with making sure we just don't let certain people in the profession. Okay. I told you I was gonna ruffle feathers.
I'm done.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question online.
Online, okay.
Okay. This is from Pamela Harris. Any perspectives you can share, please, on the value of orienting well-intended education equity leaders across race and generation to practice to elevate, center critical youth voice as an impetus or building adult capacity for activating critically to conscious ecosystems as a matter of course, authentically tapping critical youth voice as a beacon for how we lead.
Ooh, that's a long one right there. I heard the youth voices part.
Okay.
Can I take that part?
Let's do the youth voice.
Use your Dr. Harris.
Yeah, okay, exactly here. So look, I'm part of my AERA presidential police, Lord knows I've been telling that. I want to lift up youth voice. I think youth voices, I think young people are just brilliant. I think the question is, why don't we listen more to young people? Say that again. Somebody said.
I said they're not boring.
They're not boring. They're fascinating. And to me, the younger ones, the filters are gone. They will tell you what they think and feel, right? So one of the things I've been saying that doesn't go over well with some of my union friends in Los Angeles is that, so look, our university professors, at the end of every semester, we get what? Evaluations, where our students get to tell us anonymously what they thought about our class, what they thought about us, and sometimes those evaluations are painful to read, but that's what they think about you, right? And I'm saying, why don't we do something comparable in high schools, right? At the end of the semester, why don't we let students give their assessment of their teachers? So what my union friends say is that will be used against us. And that will be used to kind of, deny folks tenure. It will be used to kind of really just kind of, it'll be used as a weapon. But my thing is, from a professional practice standpoint, wouldn't you want to know how your teaching is being received by your students? Wouldn't you want to know how you can be better? So one thing I asked, like my few service teachers, I say, try this mid-semester. Just tell students to anonymously write you a note with a piece of paper. 3 questions. What's working in this class so far? What's not working in this class so far? And what do you want to see more of the second half of this class? Because we have to provide anonymous pathways for students to be able to tell us what they're thinking. Because if we don't give them these kinds of ways, they're going to find other ways. When students don't show up, that's their way of saying what they think about the class. When students stay late and come early, that tells us what they think about the class. When they come to your classroom during lunch hours because they want to be in your presence, that tells us what they think about the class. If they fall asleep every day, so they're telling us in different ways. The question is, what are we listening to? So I think the more we can find student voices, but I always tell folks, again, emotional intelligence, you can't ask the questions unless you really want to hear the answers. And I think there are lots of folks who would really not do well if they heard what students really thought about. So I don't know if I got at that question.
I'll answer.
Okay.
If I get a long answer.
Okay.
Other questions, we have about 7 more minutes. Yes, over here, then you'll come over here.
Thank you for your talk, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Veronica Holly from the Edmund Institute for Early Elementary Education at Keynote.
TC. Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you about trust.
Yes.
And having, and getting schools to think about bridging that gap of trust for Black residents, Black students, Black families around mental health. What has your work done on the issue of trust and transforming schools to be more trustworthy? For us to engage in mental health.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I mentioned here that the work we kind of watched with the Los Angeles Community Coalition. Trust is rooted in relationships, and I think the advantage that nonprofits have is the fact that the standards and teaching piece is not so much a part of their framework, so they can spend time to cultivate relationships and to get to know who students are, share themselves, because so much of trust is centered on time and consistency and reliability. And sometimes I hear this from folks who are like at the secondary level, I got 150 kids. I want to build trust, I just don't have time. And there's too many of them and not enough of me. And I think that's a legitimate thing. I think there are ways you can still do it. But I think we have to recognize that for so many of our students, they're not willing to open up because they have not been treated well by the adults. And sometimes all it takes is one teacher who has done harm to a student, and that student is protecting him, her, themselves for the next 10 years because they just don't want to trust. That doesn't mean we give up. I always tell my pre-service teachers, you got to understand this is a long run. Students are watching you. I'm going to see if you say what you do what you say, and over time, will you be there? Because sometimes adults, we don't. And I think all it takes is one misstep sometimes. And this is where we have to have some cultural humility. We have to recognize when we make missteps, when we make mistakes. And I always tell teachers, you can't sit and berate a student in front of everybody for something that child didn't do. And then when after the fact, come and apologize to that student one-on-one. No, if you were willing to berate me in front of everybody, you should apologize to me in front of everybody, right? So it's those kinds of characteristics, but I still think so much of it comes back to culture. Culture is a big part of this, how we operate, how we interact, how we make meaning of who I like, who I dislike, who I trust, who I don't trust. And if you don't know that cultural sort of milieu in which young people operate from, you're never going to build trust. But the models that work, folks are in those communities, they're in those schools, they know the parents, they know the grandparents, they know the folks who are part of their ecosystem so that they can understand what are the levers that are tied to trust. If you don't do that, then you're making a big misstep. And I'm not a big fan of what I see a lot of teacher education programs do. We're gonna have a culture day. We're gonna go out and we're gonna drive through the community and point out things and say, now, it's not that, it's time. And you gotta sit and listen and hear and be critiqued and hear how folks feel like, schools have not been hospitable places for us. And all those things are part of the process. And I have to ask the question, we have to ask the question, are we willing to do that in order to build that trust? That's a long answer.
We have a student question over here.
Yes.
I'm Paige Abbott, I'm a student at SOE.
Hey, Paige, what year are you?
I am a rising junior, but I'm going into my student teaching.
Come on now, give Paige a round of applause. You're a student teacher. That's what I'm talking about.
I had the opportunity to work with high schoolers this year.
Nice.
And when it comes to mental health, I've experienced like a few perspectives. There's definitely the students that still hold on to those stigmas and taboos. But then there's also students who are learning a lot more than I am from like TikTok, the internet, and all of that.
Yeah.
Some of it being correct and a great learning opportunity for me, and some of it being misconceptions and whatnot, because TikTok is the most reliable resource. Right?
Yep.
So I'm just unsure of how to approach that conversation where I want everybody to learn from each other so that we don't have that great gap.
Right.
I was wondering if you had any advice for asking students to share, knowing that some of it they're very proud to share, and some of that conversation I don't want them to feel pressured.
Oh, that's a tough one. So you have to learn about the work of Brendisha Tynes, because what Professor Tynes has looked at is just the role of social media, internet on young people's mental health. And it's deeply troubling because what she's finding is that there's a gender component of it that's deeply troubling that causes high levels of depression and anxiety for lots of girls. It's highly racialized for folks of color. So you have to, the internet piece is one that, I'm just glad I wasn't a teenager when social media was around, because it can do a number on people. So I think you have to kind of sort of proceed carefully, because the reality is that's a completely different world, and some kids will let you into that world, other kids will not let you into that world. But it goes back to the question earlier about trust. I think you have to be as honest as you can. But here's the thing I would ask you to be careful about, and I tell this to my pre-service teachers. Your job, one of your tasks is to formulate relationships with your students. And some of my pre-service teachers think that that means to become friends with their students. That is not what I'm advocating for, right? There's a big difference. Your job is to draw a clear line in terms of how you build relationships built on trust, but not to become friends. So I'm always a little uneasy when teachers say, well, if I follow them on TikTok, or if they follow me, I just don't think that's the route you want to go, because then it blurs the lines in deeply troubling ways. But I think you have to perhaps have some one-on-ones to find out what young people want to share, or what young people are wanting to share. Is it appropriate? And once that cat is out the bag, can you facilitate those conversations? Because it can take on a life of its own. So with that one, I would just say proceed with caution. Talk to some of your colleagues and peers, because I think we should find, this is the work of Ernest Morrell and even Jeff Scher, who talked about critical media literacy, that you can use some really productive ways to engage young people around media literacy, but what comes out of those conversations can be deeply troubling. And you have to remember that you're still a mandated reporter, and some of the things that you might hear or see might require a certain level of intervention. So.
How you doing? Christopher N. Smith. I am a advisor for the Federal Emergency Management Agency and a doctoral candidate at Howard University.
Say that again, doctoral candidate.
There you go. My primary responsibility role is adult education.
Yes.
And we find a lot of barriers when it comes to relating equity-based principles and the like to a lot of our staff during workforce development initiatives and opportunities. What resources would you suggest, or could you forward forward to as fellow aiders in this fight to ensure that our workforce understands equity beyond just its basic unconscious bias principles.
Wow. So let's talk after. I was just yesterday out at Educational Testing Services, ETS, and they've got a big focus around workplace development now. But again, I think with workplace development, this is what I was trying to have the conversation, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That when you talk about skill development and sort of economic mobility opportunities, it's all contingent upon what folks see as kind of their respective niches. And I think that the equity question asks, what kinds of opportunities have certain populations been exposed to? What kinds of skills have they been introduced to? I'm in California, right? And we just had this, I was just having this conversation with somebody. We just had this data that came out about 6 months ago that said that our graduation rates were at the highest levels ever. This is all during the pandemic. I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. Because just 2 months ago, you told us that kids weren't reading at grade level, right? So I think what we're doing, we've done a disservice to kids, at least in California. I can't speak on other parts of the country, where the diplomas that they have are not worth the paper that they're on. Because we lowered standards, we changed standards, and we told kids that they were graduates and their skill set is not what it should be. Those young people are gonna have a difficult time when it comes to workforce development. So we have to be, again, focused on how we help to sort of raise the floor a little bit to make sure that there's a requisite amount of skills that young people have if they're gonna enter into the workplace. Because if not, they're gonna be led to a deep set of disappointments when they realize, I got a high school diploma from DC Public School, but why can't I pass an entry exam? Or why can't I pass a certification test, right? So I think the equity conversation is about sort of where individuals are coming from, what kind of opportunities we're given from an educational standpoint, and how do we then begin to modify our workforce interventions in such a way that meets people where they are, and not just maintaining this sort of unilateral standard, assuming that if you can't get there, it's all because you didn't try hard enough, as opposed to saying, how do we recognize that something happened along the educational journey? So we could talk more about some of the work that ETS is doing. I think that could be helpful.
We have time for one more question.
This is from Dr. Rodney Hobson.
Dr. Hobson, come on now.
What do you see as opportunities and challenges of being a dean at an urban context in the United States? What canaries in the mine should we be listening for and looking for?
Come on, man. So Dean Holcomb-McCoy and I were just talking about this. Deanships are hard. I've never been a dean. I've only been an associate dean, but you get a peek behind the curtain, and it's not always pretty. But I think there are lots of canaries in the mine in our departments. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, right?
Just get it out there.
No. Look, everybody doesn't play nice in our workspace. They don't. And I think just like we talked about with schools, sometimes the folks who are oftentimes who are unhappiest, we should be listening to. They're trying to tell us something, right? I mean, I go to universities all across the country. You talk to the same usual suspect. Talk to women faculty. They'll tell you about how the place is not always. That's why we were talking about Title IX, right? I said so much of my work as an associate dean dealt with Title IX issues. I was just floored by the kinds of things we had to deal with around Title IX. Some of my colleagues, who to this day I cannot look in the face and hold them in high respect that I once did because of what I now know from being behind the curtain and understanding these things. So you have to be prepared for some of the what do we say, Cheryl? Yuckiness? The yuckiness.
You just mentioned, just to add on to that point, you alluded to this notion of being performative. Like we can talk about social justice and these issues, but often we find that we can't do it. This happens on university campuses too. The notion of being able to write about something, but can you actually operationalize that in the university classroom and then go out into a community and be, I'm so impressed that you're going into schools. And I think colleges and schools of education suffer from too many faculty who do not do that. That is a piece of, that's what we're, that's our goal here in this school of education, is to hire more faculty that are really bridging theory to practice. And we talk about it, but it's harder to do, much more difficult. Much more difficult to find those faculty that are willing to do that.
Yep.
And then we have to then, from a policy standpoint, is reward faculty for doing that type of work. And that is, as Corbin knows, changing university policies does mirror K-12 policies. Slow to change.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because this
Yes.
is important, and it's a hard shift, and we've been trying in our department, because there are folks, for example, I'll take our teacher education department, which I've been part of, who spend hours, countless hours in schools, supporting teachers, doing the real heavy lifting, but they may not have the CV that has as many publications as the colleague who's able to kind of just sort of, and I'm not trying to throw any disrespect or disregard for the person who's not in school, but we have to then try to explain in these meetings that, listen, person X may not have as many publications, but the work that this person does is really valuable to our mission.
Yes.
We say we want to be about developing the next generation of leaders and teachers, and folks who are out there doing it oftentimes are seen as being not as productive. And it's a hard paradigm to change, because people have been ingrained with the idea that it's about the count. And if I've got the count on my CV, then it shows that I've been an impact maker, and that's not always the case.
Which can cause, when you talk about the canary in the mine, is that the toxicity comes because there's a mix of faculty who are doing different aspects of teaching and learning.
Right.
There's an assumption that universities should only be one way or the other,
That's
instead
right.
of
That's right.
being this collective.
Oh,
So
man.
some of that can create even the toxic environment, even in university. So there is that, but faculty will come and talk to us, deans, just like they do for students, talk to teachers. So we have to listen.
The canaries in the mine.
That is, and listen to our partners outside of university.
That's right.
Because as I talk to superintendents and chancellors and principals and leaders, we have the same interests and want to solve the same problems.
That's
The
right.
question is, how do we come together? That was the whole emphasis for this conference, for this instance.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Oh, great. Hey, let's have one more question. Anyone have a burning question that you want to ask us? We have jazz music outside waiting for you. Food, all this good stuff that Dr. Ellis has planned for us. One last question? So, Gregor, any questions online for Dick?
How do we better integrate decolonized ways of being and knowing into teacher education programs to honor the lived experience of students from the global majority?
Doozies here. I think one of the ways we start is, and I struggle with this in my place. I'm not trying to cast aspersions elsewhere. We have to look at who are the faculty who are teaching teachers. That's been a challenge for us, because our teacher education faculty are nowhere close to being reflective of the communities that they serve. So we can't hold the teachers in training accountable when the folks who train them don't know that. So we have to be intentional about trying to get folks who have a much more critical approach to seeing communities and seeing this work, because again, and we had to go through this thing a couple of years ago. I was just looking at the syllabi of faculty in our program, and it was like we were reading the same works. There's no queer faculty, no women of color that we're reading. So like we have to start looking at the curriculum. We have to do our own internal audits to say, what are we asking our students to read? And not only that, but then here's the other part. Where our teacher education faculty were placing their teacher ed students for their student teaching, we're not the kind of people that we should be placing them with. If that makes sense. So to decolonize, we got to start with our faculty and what that looks like, and what students are reading, and what are the requirements to get in, and how they think about this working community. So it's a structural issue that I think all departments are going to have to think about if they're serious about doing it, because the models we have right now just don't fit. And you listen, the canaries in the mine are the students. The students say, look, I signed up, you say you're about social justice, but nothing I've gotten here has been social justice oriented. So look at faculty, look at curriculum, look at readings, look at syllabi, look at where we're placed, look at placement. All those things I think need to be part of sort of our own internal assessment.
Dr. Howard, may I
Yes.
offer another add to that?
Talk to us.
One of the things that I have done over the years is that before I start teaching, I present my students with my syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask them the question, what else do you need to know?
Wow. So just that right there it can be transformative.
And I think that in itself allows us to break that cycle, because when you get student input about what you're teaching,
Yep.
what you're not teaching,
Absolutely.
then you're gonna be able to serve their needs specifically,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to you're coming in and say, here's the syllabus, and this is what I expect you to do.
That's right.
Asking students simple questions
Yep.
about how do you feel about what I'm teaching and what I'm proposing is a great idea to help them move forward in terms of trying to deal with this decolonization and other kinds of things that create problems for us as educators.
Yep. Well said.
So powerful. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Dr. Tyrone Howard. Let's get back. So does it mean that since you're AERA president and AERA is based here in DC, that we'll see you more often?
Sure, if police will have me, yes. So, and Shameless Plug, 2024.
Where he is, actually.
Shameless Plug, 2024, we'll be in City of Brotherly Love. I need to see y'all there. We need to see you all there,
Oh,
okay?
we will be there
Okay.
in full blast, and just want to say that we will invite you again. This has been, I don't know about you, but I feel inspired.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'm sure you have more questions for Dr. Howard. We want to ask everyone to sort of come out into the lobby area for fellowship and just talk, network. Also, just want to recognize, I think we have Dr. Jackson. We know you know, we introduced you before you got here from Howard University. Also, Dr. Chaz Gibson, who's sitting right beside him, from the Senior Education Program Director from the U.S. Department of Ed. We just wanted to highlight what a diverse group of folks we have here from different areas. So welcome to AU School of Education. As you can see on right in front of you, there is a handout to support SIEEJ so we can continue doing this work. If you just feel inspired and want to support us and make a donation, please do. We would appreciate it. I know Dr. Antonio Ellis wants to get even more funding so we can go to where did you want to go? You wanted to have something big at the Washington Convention Center.
Long-term vision.
Long-term vision, but we want to expand. And we want to be able to bring even more people here and speakers and to expand even the days. We find 3 days can even be short for some of the wonderful information and experts that have engaged with us. So please, if you feel inspired, please do so. Outside, we have a saxophonist that's getting ready to play and serenade us as you eat. We have food outside, take pictures. Please stick around and just meet one another. Also, if you want to read more about Dr. Gordon's lecture about him, and just if you're interested in seeing this lecture again, we have a recording of SIEEJ. Go to american.edu/SOE. That's our main website. Then click on events, and then go to Dr. Edmund Gordon lecture, and you can engage even further. So we want to be here for you, even when it's not in the summer. So please engage with us, contact us, take a class, however you want to do it, to engage with us. We want to keep learning together. Enjoy the jazz and food outside. And please let Dr. Howard know how much we really appreciate him and all that he is doing to uplift the lives of students and teachers and educators. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
All right. Enjoy.